trust is like fluid and it moves and it's not perfect. And it might be a way in which like you see it real clearly as a parent and that child is so hurt and offended. And
Yeah.
yet maybe 6 months later or 6 years later, they recognize, no, wait, mom and dad, you were right.
And it is part of our job, I do believe, is to, hey, I'm going to introduce you to my values as a parent. And then as you get older, you get to decide whether you agree with those values or not. Of course, I'm human and I'm going to mess up, but I also want to take accountability to
Mhm. Mhm.
show my integrity, all of
Yeah,
it.
yeah, 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 yeah. There's no better way not to build a trusting relationship than to always sort of be on a high horse and act like an expert and be, condescending and arrogant, right? That doesn't build trust.
Behavior makes sense, and
Mm,
really understanding that most people, if not everyone, is literally doing the best they can, including
mhm.
our rude children. Hey, parents, welcome to today's episode. I'm really excited to have Danny Frazer, who was one of the co-founders of Open Sky, back with us. He spent nearly 30 years working in wilderness therapy, behavioral health care, including co-founding Open Sky, and he's just a font of information. And today we really go into the topic of trust and we break down the different facets of trust. It's a great conversation. I hope you enjoy. All right. Hi, Danny. I'm so glad to have you back. Thanks for being with us today.
Beth, I'm excited to have this conversation and great to see you again, too. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I have so many clients and just parents in front of me, day to day, as you as well. And they often, if not daily, bring up trust, bring up like, well, I just don't trust him or I just don't trust her or the co-parent, of course. It's just, there's a lot of that word. I guess I run into it a lot. And I have felt the complexity of it sort of overwhelms me a little bit because it feels a little, I guess, amoeba-like, honestly, like kind of hard to nail down for me. And
Mhm.
so we had discussed, like, oh, let's have you back on. And what are we going to chat about? And you had mentioned trust. And I got really giddy because it's just one of those things that so many people ask me about. And I would love to know more. I would love to know your take on it.
Mhm.
And so here we are going to discuss a really awesome and complex, you know, word.
Well, like you, Beth, in my kind of professional career, there was a moment when I was like, "Oh," it kinda hit me like, "Oh, this thing that I need to know more about that's so critical in every relationship, in every group of people, family, organization is trust." And I was like, it's such a big topic, and as you alluded to, it's so nebulous. It's hard to
Mm.
kinda put my hands around or my head around. And so what do we do? And this is, maybe 8, 10 years ago, go to Google and start looking around and poking around. And that's when I stumbled into a framework. And it's actually to credit Brené Brown, who, for your audience, if they don't know who she is, she's both an author and a researcher. She has a background in social work. She's written some best-selling books, including Dare to Lead. She talks a lot about vulnerability. I stumbled into an Oprah Winfrey show that she was on talking about trust, and in particular, the anatomy of trust. And
Oh,
it was the first time where I'm like, "Oh, someone hit the nail on the head." And again, I remember there being some conflict at work and hearing someone say, "I just don't trust," and just like, "Well, what does that mean?" And this sort of craving to like be able to know what might I do or what might I help others do or what might I not be doing that I could look at or work on that would help me have trusting relationships or people that I care about have trusting relationships because you're right, it's critical to human relationship, all of them.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, we're going to go into the framework that Brene Brown reveals, I guess.
Mhm,
And what is interesting is this is just a little bit of a take that I've had, and I want to get your thoughts on this before we kind of launch into the Brene Brown framework. Is that when we're dealing with teenagers, which a lot of the parents who listen are, and even young adults, we're dealing with a certain brain physiological like maturity, right? Like
mhm.
a certain brain
Definitely.
maturity,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
And what's interesting is this, let's call it an immature brain, although I mean, in general,
Mhm.
It has other things at play. And so parents are always like, well, I just can't trust them, or they always lie to me. And then my response is, of course they're lying to you. Or something like that. It's just that because their brains just work differently and they have other, I guess, priorities
Yeah.
than telling the truth. Or not only just telling the truth, but like when parents are thinking, I can't trust them, like, well, what are you trusting them to do?
Mm.
And and that I think is such an interesting question, that they are trusting them to sort of act like adults when
Yeah.
they're not really adults, they're teenagers. And
Mhm.
so then anyway, that's just a side note. So I just wondered
I
what you'd
think
have to
that's
say
a
about that before
well,
we jump.
we're going to jump in, and you and I are going to have some great back and forth. And I think that actually is a great example we should circle back to. And we even explored
Great.
this in our pre kind of podcast conversation about like, oh, how do we apply this model, this framework to the real life scenarios? And I think that's a great one. So let's benchmark that, or I should say,
Great.
bookmark that, and we'll come back to it. But let me start with where she starts, which is she's a researcher. I think she's a PhD in social work. And when she, in her own personal life, was intrigued by this concept, she found a definition she liked. And I want to share this because it was something I was reminded of in preparation, because you even touched on it. What is a good definition for trust at its sort of simplest? And it is something important to us is vulnerable to the action of others. Something we
Oh,
cherish, something we value. It's important, and we are willing to be vulnerable to others' actions, right? So there's a couple things. I love
yes.
that definition. I also want to emphasize something I've come across, which is like we are wired for trust. Is something else I've read. I do a lot in sort of that leadership coaching realm, and there's a book called The Leadership Challenge, and they have a whole sort of piece on the importance of trust in organizations, and specifically the importance of leaders being trustworthy and also trusting their team. And they actually start out with some like, hey, baseline. And they say that we're wired for trust, and that also trust is a central issue, is the language they use in human relationship. And it's like, yeah, so
Yeah.
we're wired for it. And guess what? We're going to trip up. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to struggle with trust. And so, anyway, those are a couple of things I just want to lay out at the outset before kind of transitioning to like the model that Brené came up with. And then she came up
Yeah.
with it based on research. And she, like any good teacher, you and I were just talking, one of the things that's great about Brene, and we really encourage people to find this Super Soul Session, Oprah Winfrey, you can YouTube it. There's little clips, you can find this content to really do it justice. But you and I know we'll have a great conversation. But she breaks down the research she does on this topic into an acronym, which is braving. And I think the acronym is great because basically to trust is to be vulnerable, and braving vulnerability to the actions of others.
I love that. Like you're almost it's something that's important to me, and I'm sort of handing it over to you
Mm-hmm.
in the idea that you will, right? I can trust you with
Yeah.
it, I guess is what it's
Yeah.
saying. So I
Yeah.
I love that definition as well. And it really resonated. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So B is boundaries. And this one is great for all of us, which is all right. Like there are things that are, ways I need to be treated or respected. There's ways that you deserve to be treated and respected. And we have a place where that's, hey, that's pushing a boundary or unacceptable. And so boundaries is kind of, I'd say, maybe the starting point. Obviously, boundaries, we could talk about it in terms of family, in terms of mom, dad, child. We can talk about it in terms of sort of organizations. It's like, all right, part of what makes for a good relationship in a business, for instance, is like, hey, we have the roles and responsibilities defined. There's a good boundary between where your responsibility is and where my responsibility is. I think good
Yeah.
boundaries in parenting, co-parenting. All right, in terms of being a couple. So it's just like, oh yeah, we've got to have intact boundaries that we respect, and boundaries that we also enforce. And if someone,
Yeah.
we all know this, someone violates a boundary physically, it's really easy, right? If someone hurts us physically, like, well, how can you ever trust them? But there are also other boundaries, which is emotional boundaries, or maybe, certain things you don't want to talk about, or things that are not appropriate, or things that are, maybe conflicting with things that are of value to you, for instance. So I think boundaries
Yeah.
is B is, a really kind of obvious, but I'm glad that she put it in
Well,
first order.
and in it, she says there cannot there cannot be trust without boundaries. I believe she says that. And I thought, okay, wait a second. And I was thinking about that. And I thought, one of the things that I remember with boundaries specifically is I think with boundaries, you have to know what you're okay with and what you're not okay with. And I think so many moms in particular, I think really struggle with knowing themselves well enough because they're so, moms tend to be quite sacrificial in their parenting, especially ones with struggling kids. And so I just wanted to relate to the parents out there who are like, are struggling with boundaries, because that is a often a struggle that I find and I see, and that I am happy to talk to people about. And it just, I had no idea what I was willing to sort of allow and not allow, and support and not support. And so that was one of the things I had to figure out
Mhm.
was, oh my gosh, do I know myself enough to even be able to state a boundary with
Mhm.
my kid or with my co-parent or whatever? So I just want to
Mhm.
throw that out there.
Yeah. So I agree with you, and it's interesting. Each of these sort of letters for this acronym are deserving of a podcast almost in and of themselves. I
I
mean, there are
know.
books on boundaries, right? So we're just in some ways going to touch on these, and maybe in some cases
Exactly.
go in great detail. But so obviously boundaries, both being able to exert them as well as being able to respect them. So it is that
Yeah.
both direction. So R is reliability. In this one, and it's interesting, Brene goes into great detail about what reliability is. It's essentially doing what you say you're going to do, but
Amen.
doing so even, and she emphasizes, in small ways. And she goes into great detail about trust is really, frankly, earned in the small ways.
Oh, I love that.
Mm.
What does that mean to you, the small ways?
I mean, if you say you're going to do something, you do it. And it's interesting because reliability is also not overcommitting or overextending yourself. And especially for those parents who are pleasers, and I know I'm a pleaser. I just took a positive intelligence sort of assessment, and I learned about saboteurs or whatever. And like one of them is I'm a little bit of a pleaser. Well, pleasers tend to say, hey, I want to help and I want to do something, and I get overextended. Well, I'm actually impacting trust because I'm not going to be a reliable. And it's kind of related again to boundaries, but reliability is you do what you're going to say you're going to do. Interestingly, what Brene goes into great detail is it's the small things that matter. Hey, I'm going to pick you up at 3 o'clock when school's out. And I show up at 3 o'clock. And you know what? If you show up routinely at 3 o'clock and periodically at 3:10, not a big deal because I've been reliable the majority of the time, right? So it's funny, like, especially when we think about our family, like, oh, we hope that they give us or extend some leniency to us. But there's a point at which we have to be reliable. My wife
Yeah.
gets frustrated with like my lack of tidiness, and I will have periods of being reliable, and then I'll be unreliable, and I know it impacts our relationship. And not in catastrophic ways, but it's like,
Right.
oh, it's remarkable how sometimes these small things, if I say and then I, follow up with doing it, but then I can't sustain it, there's a way in which it does impact us.
It sure does. And reliability, I feel like seems a bit of maybe the obvious one when we talk about trust is like, right? More even than maybe even boundaries. I think, oh yeah, I need to be reliable. And I think there's so many people, the ADHD folks who,
Mm,
you know, quote time blind. I've heard that term
mhm,
before. And I might be a little bit that way. And so then I'm like, oh yeah, honey, I'm going to be home at 6. And then I roll in at 7:20, and it's like, oh, and I don't mean to do that. And still, it's not helpful in the trust department, right? And
mhm,
so to have communication about that, and that's with like maybe you know, a peer. But it is really interesting, the reliability. I can just hear the parents
mhm.
because because I just talk to them all day long and I am
Yeah,
one, right?
yeah.
It's like, yeah. They're okay, I'm just gonna have to say it. If you are thinking how non-reliable your kid is, I'm just going to invite you very gently to turn that around to think about
Mm,
you and
mm,
your reliability, because
mm,
it's so very easy to think, yeah, well, my kid said he would text me when he got to the party. My kid said that she would not vape again, or all those things. And it's like, yes, and let's go ahead and just turn the focus back on us and think, oh, wait a second,
mm,
Danny here is, inviting us to to ask if we're reliable,
Yeah.
not necessarily those around us, right? Like we're trying to figure out like how can we up our trust game, if you will. And I just
Mm.
thought I'd throw that out there.
Yeah.
So,
It's interesting because I also want to draw on another type of reliability that's maybe less concrete that she talks about. And
mm.
it's care and concern, meaning going kind of like I'm reliable in that what matters to you is something that I'm attentive to.
Oh
That's another
yeah.
type of reliability. Like, and so, an example is, maybe someone you work with, or maybe even a friend, and they're like, oh, you reach out to them knowing like something just happened. That's another way of
Yes.
like, hey, I'm reliable. I'm here. I'm attentive to you. If that makes
Yeah.
sense, you have care and
Yes.
concern. Interestingly, when you look at it from kind of that business standpoint and leadership, there's so much research around care and concern for employees' well-being. And when leaders, it's often what we've got sales tasks and, client issues and customer service and, whatever program delivery, where all this stuff, right? These burdensome problems as leaders we hold, that we're trying to figure out with our team. But if you remember what actually matters most to that team member, and it might be, hey, their mom was just in the hospital, and you actually lead with that, that is another
Yeah.
way you're reliable because you know, you're remembering what matters, what is most
Yes.
critical, which I found was interesting. Again, there's so much nuance with Brene and her research around this, but that was something that I thought was like, oh yeah, that's another form of, hey, I'm someone who's human too, and who's connecting with you
Yeah.
on what matters.
Yeah. I have a friend who remembers a lot of their friends' children's names and ages. And
Little
she is,
things like that. It's
yeah,
unbelievable.
it
Yeah.
is. It's, and I just watch her and she genuinely cares. And you should see the people just like they want to talk about their kids. They want to say, oh, this and she and it's I can see her building bridges of trust with those people. And
Mhm,
it's
mhm,
really beautiful to watch.
mhm,
So that
mhm.
yeah, I
Yeah,
love that you said that. It's
yeah.
it's the it's the small things. It's the paying attention to somebody. Oh,
Mhm. Yep. So on to so braving a accountability. And this one is probably one of my favorites. And the reason is that we're never perfect. So we make mistake with boundaries. We're not really reliable. And we'll talk about some of the other things. Accountability is saying, hey, you can apologize and you can make amends and you can accept an apology, And so it's this idea
yeah.
that there will be times when, oh man, I didn't do something I said I was going to do, or I wasn't there in the way that I said I was going to be, or I slipped up. You can repair trust. And there's this whole concept. There's even programs out there that sort of build on it. And there's some attachment models around sort of the idea of rupture and repair. And it's like that
Yeah.
is actually what's happening in all of our relationships kind of all the time because we're imperfect. We're human. And if
Amen.
we, and I think about both my business partnerships and my personal partnerships and my children and my relationship with them, like the ones that matter the most are the ones I've apologized to the most because it's for one, I want to sustain that relationship. That relationship means a lot. And there's more at stake because again, they put their trust in me. They gave me something important that they were vulnerable to my actions. And then somehow I let them down. So periodically we have to say, oh, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Or
Yeah.
be willing to be in dialogue, right? Which is like, hey, this hurt or this was tough, and then reflect and be like, oh, wait a minute, yeah, I did something that impacted you. And so that accountability piece, it goes both ways. You can't have trust without people being accepting of your apology, but also your willingness to apologize.
Yeah, absolutely. I it is. I love that. It's so important, the accountability piece. It's that rupture and repair, I feel like is it just increases not all the time, but hopefully if it's done genuinely right, that it can really increase intimacy
Hmm.
across the board, right? It's just it's how humans relate. I feel
Hmm.
like if they're I now it'd be interesting to hear your comment about this, but I feel like if there's not some ruptures and some repairs, it feels like it's probably not a super honest relationship
It's
in many
not a
ways, right?
trusting relationship. So back
Yeah,
to the definition, like
right.
something important to me, I'm vulnerable to your actions. And
Right.
right, I mean, like, whoa, like let's think about that contextually. There are relationships that are really sort of dependent on high levels of trust, and some relationships that might be a little more transactional, maybe, you know. And so, yeah, you're right. Like the chances of rupture are much higher in those more
Mhm.
intimate relationships where there's more at stake. You know, like, hey, it's a marriage, we have children together, or it's a business partnership, or hey, we're in the business of saving lives, and your relationship, medical team to clinical team, or admissions team to, field team, or whatever. Like, hey, there is a lot at stake here. And so trust is, it may be more easily impacted, but and so
Yeah.
therefore, all right, how do we think about it in a way so we can repair it and restore it and proceed because of what we've committed to in these relationships?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love that. Okay, what's the next one?
So V is vault, which is, really and truly like confidentiality, privacy, and
Ugh,
if I share something with you, Beth, and I, can share it in confidence, I know it's not going to leak out, and vice versa.
that's
And this is the
big.
one Brene brings to. I love this one, and she talks about sort of a cheap rapport through common enemies. She kind of talks about like
Yeah,
we can
like
talk bad about
gossiping.
somebody, gossiping, and like, but it's she. I think she says it's like hot wiring connection. It's like
Oh,
it's kind of
yes.
cheap, and it's
Oh, it's
fast, so
totally
it's
cheap.
fascinating. And so again, sometimes you're like, oh, I want to share this with you about this person, and it's a way I can maybe make a quick connection, but actually will backfire because then like, well, why would I trust you? you know so
Yes.
V or vault, there's the professional, like confidentiality, privacy, there's, but there's also, I guess, nuance or subtlety around kind of respecting others and what is unique and distinct to them. And anyway, I really appreciated kind of her perspective on that.
I did too. One story comes to mind with just somebody I know, and their child, kind of a young adult, would tell them things like, "Ooh, I really like this girl," and offer up these really vulnerable comments, I guess. And the mom, not knowing what to do with that, in public would tease.
Mm,
And, you know, she was, I think, trying to connect and trying to also avoid silence, and there was some awkward things happening, and so then the mom would divulge and in a teasing way. So you're talking about the nuances of things, and
mm,
it was devastating
mm,
to the kid, of course, because he's like, I'm telling you this in secrecy, or and you were being blatant about it. And it was interesting to kind of see the mom realize through some big ruptures, like,
mm,
oh, that is very harmful to the relationship that I have with my son. And even though it felt kind of like you were saying, sort of a sneaky way to maybe have the connection, or even just to, there was some kind of social thing as well that was came into play that I'm not sure of,
mhm,
trying
mhm,
to be seen a certain way perhaps.
mhm,
But really that mom coming to realize how hurtful it was, and to be able to come and say and repair with her son and say,
mhm.
I am so sorry. And then watching them really build that back up, which took a good amount of time, if you can imagine.
I
And
imagine
so
so.
that, yeah, so that vault is interesting because sometimes we may deem something not as vulnerable or not as
Mhm,
important. And
mhm,
so then we're like, oh, they don't care about that,
mhm,
da 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 da. And
mhm.
then find out that it really did mean something to the person who said it. So that's that
Yeah,
nuance I feel like coming
yeah.
out is,
Mhm.
oh, really, really rough. So,
Yeah, trying to put ourselves in that person's shoes and imagining like, gosh, what if I were them and they said this? And it's sort of, again, I think that I appreciate that there's this sort of, maybe we want to quickly get rapport or, kind of
yeah.
hotwire connection, but you're really communicating kind of subconsciously, maybe consciously, to that other person, like, is this person trustworthy?
Yeah.
Anyway, it was eye-opening for me, and I'm grateful that she shared it with me in that way, for sure.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. The vault's a big deal, I think.
I think it is. I think it is, especially with social media these days, and sort of the
Oh,
temptation sometimes to go out there, and the anonymity you can have, and like, that's not really, ultimately gonna build and grow trust,
Yeah.
so.
I just had this other thought because I hear a lot of parents say, I'm really actually excited to ask you this. I hear a lot of mostly moms will say, I can't talk about the struggles with my kid because it's theirs.
Mm,
And so then a mom or a dad, they don't they don't go get help. They don't rely on possibly a therapist or a coach or someone they could really get some help with. And
mm,
so what's your I know I'm kind of
mm,
I
No,
just
it's a good
think that
question.
this is so important. It's like, how would a parent express like, yeah, I'm really struggling and my kid is doing this, but not destroying the trust that might be there because it's usually really tentative at that point.
That is tough, and it feels like it's a little bit back to the beginning of this, which is around boundaries. And
Mm,
part of sort of and we'll talk about it because it also is related to integrity, which is the next kind of letter I, integrity. So
okay.
um and so maybe I'll weave these two together a little bit, but like to be a parent is to have a particular role and responsibility, right?
Hmm.
And part of that role and responsibility from my perspective, and not every parent shares this, not everybody in society agrees, is like I have a responsibility to my child's health and well-being. And there is a way in which that I own that. And so how can I proceed with something that my child, you know, maybe feels ashamed about or uncomfortable
Yeah.
with, but knowing that ultimately, because of my values and my perspective, meaning my own internal integrity, which is that I value my child's health and well being above us being friends, for instance. And so, because I value my child's health and well being and their mental health and their stability, and because I'm a parent and I believe part of my job within my boundaries is to parent them and not let them just flounder, recognizing, like, hey, they don't have a full frontal cortex, that I've been around the planet a lot longer. There is a way, I'm sure, to proceed that is respectful of your child while also being aligned with your own values at the same time. But and again, it's such a great point, and that's where like you use the word amoeba. Like trust is like fluid and it
Yeah.
moves and it's not perfect, and it might be a way in which like you see it real clearly as a parent, and that child is so hurt and offended. And
Yeah.
yet maybe 6 months later or 6 years later, they recognize, no, wait, mom and dad, you were right. Like and that you could be in dialogue with them and say, gosh, I can see your perspective and I can reflect your feelings and I can take responsibility for maybe taking a risk, and yet like, okay, there's this, and that's why I like this framework, is it's like a little bit of something to kind of hold on to kind of keep that trust alive, if you will.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah,
Awesome.
not easy topics,
I
not
know,
comp.
right?
And again, I think you could almost do like an episode on every one of these. So again, about I and integrity, it's really about, are you consistent with the values you espouse? You don't just say them. And this is
Yeah.
really important in organizations. It's really important in leadership. I think it's really important in parenting. And what it does is it puts the onus on you as a parent or you as an individual, knowing yourself
Mm,
and knowing what it is that, like, hey, I'm not willing to compromise. It's really interesting. I have an anecdote from this morning with my son. He's like, school, I know they said you need to get us there by 8:15. We have kind of a system because he struggles to get out the door, and we do all we can to help him, and he's upset that there might be some sort of consequence because he didn't get out the door on time. And he's pushing back because, like, hey, when I get to school, it's really a waste of time. And I'm like, well, actually, it's important to me that I instill a responsibility in my children, and that is what this is about. And I'm not going to sacrifice. If he sees that I wobble on that and I don't really walk that talk and I don't live that way
mm,
personally, then that's going to compromise his trust in me, if that makes sense. And so, like,
yeah.
hey, we're going to get to school at 8:15 because that's what they've asked us to do. And that's what I'm committed to do because I think it's important to learn to be responsible.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think the R of reliability and the I of integrity seem to go really hand in
Yeah,
hand.
there's a lot of connectivity. And I
Yeah.
find myself kind of seeing, reliability and integrity, I could see them being kind of nested and connected. And in her work, Brene Brown really talks about it from kind of this values perspective.
Yeah.
And reliability is a little bit more from an action behavior. But I mean, again, there's, I think, a lot of connectivity.
Yeah, no, I like it. It is interesting. I think of the word consistency just comes up with when we're thinking about reliability and integrity. And what you were saying about, I guess this is maybe a harsher word, but just trying not to be a hypocrite.
Mm,
They were still
totally.
human.
Hmm.
Maybe that is too
Hmm.
strong of a word,
Hmm.
but really thinking about what's important to you as a parent, and it is part of our job, I do believe, is to, hey, I'm going to introduce you to my values as a parent. And then as you get older, you get to decide whether you agree with those values or not. But it is my job to try and teach and emulate those, or, be an example to those. And so back to that nuance of just, of course, I'm human and I'm going to mess up, but I also want to take accountability to
Hmm. Hmm.
show my integrity, all of
Yeah,
it.
yeah, 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 yeah. So I have a good story that I like to tell about integrity, because when I was a teenager, and I think it speaks to my parents' values that they hold, which is to a certain extent like self-reliance. Maybe it's about being a positive contributing member to society. I'm not exactly sure. I don't want to put words in their mouth, but that's an important value growing up. We're not slackers. We're not going to sort of, for lack of a word, mooch off people. We're going to contribute. And so I remember being like a junior in high school and being like, I don't know what I want to do. Do I go to college? Do I not go to college? And I remember kind of like, well, what if I don't go to school? And they're like, well, you can live at home, but once the summer's over after senior year, you're going to pay rent. And I remember being kind of hit by this. And what that was is it was a form of integrity, which is they know that it's important that their children have a chance to contribute. And they actually believe in it. And they're going to put their money where their mouth is, which is like, hey, you're welcome to live here, but you're going to pay rent because we know you can grow up to be an adult.
Hmm.
And that was kind of an interesting example of like a type of integrity,
Sure.
where they had a value and they had like a way that really connected. And anyway, I'm sure there's lots of examples out there, across the board, but that was one that I kind of resonates with me.
Yeah. Yeah. The integrity piece is awesome.
So N is non-judgment, and you've kind of touched on a couple of, so non-judgment is N and G is generosity. And non-judgment is, you know, e- essentially trying to come to things kind of suspending judgment. It's easy to jump to conclusions. It's easy to interpret something. And, how do we both to ourselves kind of come with that sort of quieting the criticism a bit, and
Yeah.
not being judgmental. And so non-judgment is something that is, I think, a practice for us personally, but it's also an important practice in having trusting relationships.
Yeah, it is, I think, one of the tallest asks, if that makes sense, is the not judgment. It's so interesting how often, parents take things personally, people in general, humans take things personally, which it's kind of interesting how I would do that, but that feels like judgment to me,
Mm,
right? When you take things personal, you're like, well, this is about me in a negative way.
mhm,
That's my assumption, right? But really not only listening and tuning your ears to a less judgment. That makes
mhm,
sense.
mhm,
And also, I think beginning, conversations or
mm.
dialogue or actions with that non judgment. And I think a lot of people, it's hard to think, well, what should I be doing instead of judging? And I think it's being curious. That's what I throw out there. I don't know what you think about that.
No, I love that. One of the critical attributes of a leader in particular, and this is something I'm always fascinated by, and I think it applies in parenting too, is having this sort of humility, kind of coming with humility in how you listen and how you're curious. And the concept is
Mm,
humble inquiry. And
mm,
so it's not jumping to conclusions, and it's
right.
giving space for people to show up and talk and be themselves. And, in other words, something can happen. I think this happens a lot in email correspondence. You get an email and you kind of read between the lines, and it's easy to jump to a conclusion. And it's like, you know what? Let me get off the email exchange to pick up the phone. And again, it's just sort
Yeah.
of it's human nature. It's in our brains. It's how we're wired to think and judge. Like that's just what our brain does. And so how do we pause? And in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he talks about the space between stimulus and response. And it's like, oh, this is where
Yep.
non-judgment lies. Like, so how do oh, something happened. Okay, how do I pause and not judge it? And then I can be purposeful in how I proceed. And I think
Yep.
that's hitting kind of the nail on the head of what Brené Brown is going for.
Right. Oh, yes. And it's interesting. And I think that I love that you mentioned the pause. I think my audience is pretty familiar with that word up to this at this point. But and the natural tendency to judge and to go negative, right? It is a human thing, and we have a negative bias, right? And to really, I just love that you said that. It's like it's okay if that happens, and then to pause, take a break, try to reset, and try to come with that. What you said,
Humble
inquiry,
inquiry. Yeah.
inquiry.
Yep.
Yes, love
Curiosity,
it.
humble curiosity. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
A critical
Great.
attribute. As a parent, I think also, part of trust is also, again, back to a willingness to be vulnerable to the actions of others. And so as a parent, and I can again recall some dialogue with my older son around like, gosh, I'm frustrated because I'm trying to parent in this way and it doesn't seem to be working. So I'm sort of acknowledging with some
Mm,
humility and then maybe talking about things that matter and then sort of inviting like, what suggestions or thoughts or comments do you have about this approach? And so really kind of inviting participation, which is, I
yeah,
think, what we want from our family members. It's what we want in our partnership, because we might not be aware that that doesn't hit well or doesn't sit well or doesn't resonate with them. And so you have to bring some of that curiosity and humility for sure.
yeah. And being open enough to, like you're saying, just to ask. That says. I feel like that says so much. Sort of the subtext of like, I value your opinion. I trust what you have to say. I'm interested in you. All sorts
Mm-hmm.
of things. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
everything.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I think that's lovely.
Yeah, there's no better way probably not to build a trusting relationship than to always sort of be on a high horse and act like an expert and be, condescending and arrogant, right?
Yeah,
And
I know
that's
it
kind of
all.
the other side of non-judgment. It's being judgmental, it's being critical, it's being a know-it-all. Like that doesn't build, ultimately, that
Yeah,
doesn't build trust.
yeah. And not everybody, of course, experiences this, but I think many, many of my clients are in that realm, and it
Mm,
might be a generational type thing. Maybe that's a
mm,
huge generality, but
mm.
I guess I just see it a lot. Is they grew up, I think, feeling like they had to know everything because everything was just too hard, something like that. I don't really know, but so
Yeah.
it's interesting. It's interesting for the parents nowadays to be able to say I'm sorry, to be able to go to that rupture, to be able to say I might not know everything. What are your idea, child of mine? And I
Mhm,
think it's an interesting and wonderful change of
mhm,
parenting.
mhm. Totally. No, I think, yeah, it's an important attribute of being in partnership with anybody is having a certain humility and a willingness to ask for help. And that's something else she emphasizes. Like, we're all great. And this is probably speaking to you and I, maybe more than your audience, Beth, but like, it's easy for me to give and it's easy for me to listen and it's easy for me to empathize and sort of be in that caretaker role. Interestingly, if we can't allow others to do that for us, that also impacts trust. And so I
Yes.
always found that, and it's interesting that I think it applies to parenting. I think it applies to leadership. I think it applies in programs. I mean, I can remember sitting with students out in wilderness therapy, which I did for a long time, and sometimes being like, I'm perplexed. And we had set this up in structure and rules and consequences or rewards or whatever, and it's not working. And sort of bringing that vulnerability and sort of honesty and authenticity, still having boundaries, right? Still having like, hey, we are the staff here. It's not going to be Lord of
Right.
the Rings, but sort of being like, hey, we don't have it all figured out. And we want to invite your thoughts. And it's remarkable how uplifting and empowering that is.
Yes. Lord
And
of the
how
Flies.
you can get how you can prevent Lord of the Flies by engaging
Right.
them with a certain amount of responsibility.
I love that because you're right. It's like, oh, I might be letting go of some leadership here, but no, that's the opposite, right?
Mm,
When you're actually looking to your people, your clients, the
mhm,
kids or
mhm,
whatever, and
mhm,
saying, "Help me out here. Like, what's going
mhm,
on?"
mhm,
I think
mhm.
that's really brave
Yeah.
leadership. I
Yeah,
guess.
absolutely. So G, the last one, and you mentioned something related to it that I didn't want to jump ahead too far, but G is generosity.
Yeah.
And again, these are all nested and connected. And I know you talked earlier about sort of the teenage brain and being a parent and so generosity is really about giving people the benefit of the
Benefit.
doubt. It's believing that they actually aren't purposely trying to hurt us, that they are trying to do their best. It's a way of perceiving them
Yeah.
as fallible people on the earth trying to get their needs met and
Yep.
seeing them through that generous perspective. And I think as parents, part of that is educating yourself about what does it mean to be a teenager? And
Yes.
like,
Yes.
oh, they did that again, and I'm so frustrated. Well, a generous perspective is to kind of understand how that's not unusual, and this is where
Right.
parent coaching can help so much, or where programs can bring so much to parents to be like, oh, I'm shifting my perspective, and it actually shifts my tolerance and acceptance in a way in which I extend some generosity. So instead of immediately, clamping down or getting reactive, it helps me get non-judgmental, more understanding, more receptive. So I'm in relationship as opposed to critical, shut down, judgmental, you know,
Right.
yeah, retaliatory or reactive or whatever. And so that generosity piece, I think it kind of rounds out a lot of it. And it's almost like it fills in a lot of the gaps of like, and we all have friends and partners and we let each other down and we drop the ball and we miss something. And it's like, is your first response like, oh, that person deserves the benefit of the doubt?
Mhm.
And most of those people in our lives do. And in extending it and still inquiring and wanting to get clear and maybe having to express some frustration or hurt or whatever, you can ultimately kind of keep the trust from diminishing too much by just having that mentality and that mindset.
Yeah, I have a lot to say about this one, I think. But one thing is generous does not mean passive. And especially
Mm,
when we're talking about, parent child roles, I guess. And I think a lot of parents might go there of like, I'm going to let him get away with that kind of idea. And it's like, that's not what we're talking about, right? That's where boundaries come in with, if there
mhm,
was an action, then that needs to be addressed. And maybe they're not evil.
mm.
Maybe they're not the devil child that
Yes.
that might start have crept
Yes.
into your mind.
Yes.
That
Yes.
what if they're a kid? What if they have an
Yeah.
undiagnosed thing, illness, or
Mm,
what if
mm,
there's so many things at play, I find.
mhm, mhm,
Like many a lot of my children, if not all of them, have like an ADD thing going on.
mm,
And when I didn't understand it as much, I just thought they were being rude. I thought they
mm,
were being mean. I
mm,
thought they were forgetting on purpose. I thought
mhm,
I didn't understand. And so
mhm,
I think education can
mhm,
be a huge pathway to generosity, is
mhm,
is really understanding even just basic child development
mhm,
will really turn some light bulbs on,
mhm,
which I think is amazing. And then understanding if your child does have a mental illness diagnosis, please, become educated to some degree
mhm,
about it so
mhm,
that you can have that generosity, I think, come in and
mhm,
understand behavior makes sense. I'm sure
mhm,
you've heard that. I've heard that for
mhm,
years. And
mhm,
really understanding that most people, if not everyone, is literally doing the best they can, including
mhm,
our horrible coworker, our
mhm,
ridiculous boss,
mhm,
and our rude children.
mm. Yes.
So
Yeah. And I love this is probably something you were introduced to, which is, there are different models out there around human needs. And we used one from Dr. William Glasser in the program I was affiliated with, and just talked about basic human needs and just knowing that, like, hey, all of our behaviors are really trying to get a need met. And if you have that perspective in terms of this braving acronym, that's going to have a big influence on non judgment and generosity because no one's out there not trying to get a need met, just like you and I are, and so having that common ground, I think, right, and sort of being able to
yes.
acknowledge that and kind of sit side by side and looking at a problem, being like, it is totally normal to want to get that need for freedom met as an adolescent, and it's totally
Yeah.
normal for me as a parent to want to get a need met, around some power and control related to my children. And there's going to be this sort of, little entanglement. And if you can look at it through that lens and even bring that possibly to your family, I think that's another way that we can be more informed around when we have rupture and how to make repair. So I love sort of what you've brought to that. I think that's
Yeah.
important.
Awesome. I feel like there's just one thing that is, how would somebody take a step into just, even just like a little, one little notch, right?
Mm,
We're not going to solve all the trust
mm.
issues in our families and work and all of that, neighbors and whatever, but what are your thoughts in just kind of taking a step in the right direction toward trust with somebody?
Yeah, that's a great question, Beth. My guess would be for your listeners, as they've listened to what we've explored, something has probably resonated that
Ah,
gave them a light bulb,
love
and,
it.
for me, when I think back on this very exercise, one of the things that struck me actually was around generosity. And this again was
Yeah.
kind of a work concept, sort of in a work dynamic, but there was something about the way we were perceiving each other where we weren't giving each other the benefit of the doubt. Boundaries were well established. There was some reliability. We were respecting each other from sort of vault perspective in terms of confidentiality and privacy. But it was really like we had this view, and I think again, parents can get sucked into this because maybe there have been some ruptures and it's like, my kid, and you just sort of draw these big conclusions and that doesn't serve you. And so I know that in my case, in this work setting, and then that's where I think I circle back to, and I think it's really kind of maybe the most potent part is just saying, hey, I'm sorry. If there's something you recognize that you've done, there's nothing, it's really interesting as someone who's spent a lot of time in leadership. Anytime there was a problem or a conflict or a breakdown, I always looked first at what was my part? Because I
Yeah.
probably played some small role. And if I can sort of say, hey, I'm not sure, but I think I might have contributed, and I kind of step into some vulnerability around owning my part, it's remarkable what that invites in other people. And so I love that, like the A and accountability and sort of looking at my part in this relationship and saying, you know what, I didn't maybe do this as well, or I think I might have contributed in this way. That tends to invite people to feel like, hey, they're not about to, you know, bat me over the head with criticism and judgment. They're not about to reject me, but they're actually saying, hey, there's a part they played and they're interested in us figuring out some way that's better. And in turn, that tends to invite people to sort of look inward as well.
Yeah. I just want to thank you for suggesting or inviting people to, like, wherever that, whatever letter, I guess, the
Mm-hmm,
acronym, like, kind of pinged you, and
mm-hmm,
to really follow that. I just think that's such a, I'm really, I'm humbled at that invitation, because sometimes it's just so hard to know where to begin, and we're listening to all the experts, if you will, and it's like we can be our own
mm-hmm.
expert in that way,
Yeah.
in wondering, like, where do we start? We'll start where it kind of went, "Ugh,"
Mm-hmm,
that,
mm-hmm.
start
Yes.
there. I love
Yes.
I
Yeah.
love that. So
Right
thank you
on.
for that. I do if I were to answer that question as well, I think what I see from myself in my growth, and what I see in my clients, people I talk to, is I think the generous piece actually comes to me first as well,
Mm-hmm,
is if we can somehow as parents, there's an Arbinger term where it's called turn your chair, and meaning, if you just imagine two chairs and they're facing each other, which means there's trust, right? And
mm-hmm,
we're looking at each other, and we can see somebody else's reaction and responses and all the things. But if we're turned away from each other, then we're not even paying attention. We're not attuning. We're kind of in our own, I guess, world, if you will, and sort of taking things personal and whatnot.
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm,
so the generosity idea to me feels like I'm going to, as a parent, because that's my role, I have a somewhat formed prefrontal cortex, and maybe some education and whatnot. So I'm gonna do that first. I'm not gonna wait for my kid. I'm
mm-hmm,
not even gonna wait for maybe my coworker or
mm-hmm,
my spouse or co-parent or whatever. I'm gonna try, and I'm gonna turn that first. And that feels like a very generous move to me,
mm-hmm,
in realizing, like, wait a minute, I I can change the dynamic here. At least I can be in a place where I might invite a different dynamic here by
mm-hmm,
being generous.
mm-hmm.
So there's my thoughts.
I'll tie this up a little bit because I'm not a family therapist, but I think
Mhm.
there's probably some connectivity because when you look at it in terms of leadership in an organization, leaders have to go first with trust.
Yeah.
actually. And if leaders don't trust, and I'd say if parents don't trust their child actually will in turn not trust them. And there's proof
That's
in
it.
the research around organizations. If employees don't feel trusted, guess what? They don't trust leadership. Well, in the dynamic, who has the power? It's the leaders and the parents. And so the
Ah,
parents have to go first. The leader has to go
have to.
first. They have to be the ones who are willing to commit to things that are important to them, to be vulnerable to the actions of others. And so, I'm even hearing my own thinking here around like, oh, there's ways in which I could do better with my children around like, all right, if I want trust to enhance and grow, I have to be willing to kind of step in and take some risks and be vulnerable and have exchange and dialogue. And from that, we'll grow. I'll learn, they'll learn, and we'll get closer to where we're trying to go as a family or as an organization. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I just have one really quick little story I'm gonna
Hmm.
throw
Yeah,
in,
yeah,
okay?
yeah,
Okay. Because it was so hard for me, I wanted to share the story, and I have actually shared it before, but it's been a while and not everybody listens to everything, so here it is. But
yeah.
one of my sons was getting married, okay?
Mm,
And we are at the family dinner, okay? And it happens to be at a church. It's a few years ago. It happens to be at a church, okay? There's some context, some
mhm,
history there.
mhm, mhm,
And my wilderness kid, I don't call him that, but just,
mhm,
reference. He comes in and sits down, is so high.
mm,
And as a mom, as a new possibly or here a new soon to be mother-in-law, I am just flushed with embarrassment, as
mm.
you can imagine.
I bet.
Yeah. And I was just like, oh, and I was just like, oh my, what is, and my first thoughts, of course, were what is he thinking? How dare he do this to me? How could he? He's ridiculous. I mean, it just had all that flesh in for just like a few seconds.
Mhm,
And then it just, it, my training, my practice, it just clicked. And I was like, behavior makes sense.
mm,
There's something going on for him.
mm,
And that to me felt like
mm,
one of the most generous moments of my
mm,
parent life
mm.
because I was I was embarrassed. I was worried. I was
Sure.
worried of judgment. I just so many things flooded in and I thought something must be going on and this is not the time.
Mm,
And I thought if I say anything, it will not go well. Like I know
mm,
that. And
mm,
so I sat down because he's at the family
mhm,
table that's up front, the whole
mm,
thing. And
mm.
I just sat down and I said, I'm so glad you're here, which I was,
Yeah.
even though not in that state,
Mm,
but I was
mm,
so glad he was here. And he just looked at me, and then we did the night and we ate and he has experience enough that he was able to like stay somewhat subdued. Okay.
mm, mm,
And I just didn't,
mm,
I mean, my son's getting married the next day. I was like, this is
mhm,
just not the time. We're not going to do this right
mm,
now. And I
mhm,
just let it go. And the next day we were having a lunch at this kind of fun thing. And I'm walking behind this son talking to the one who's about to get married.
mhm,
And the one stops and he turns around and he goes, hey, about last night, I'm super sorry.
mm,
That was way too much.
mm,
I was super nervous about being in the church. And I
mm,
just kind of
mm,
like, he's like, I didn't know that that's what would
mm,
happen.
mm,
It, it, and my son who's getting married said, dude, it's okay. Thanks.
mm, mm,
Like, thank you for saying
mm,
something. It's all good. We're
mm,
okay.
mm.
Like I'm getting married today, the whole thing. And I still
Aw.
just being able to witness that was
Mm,
such a gift because
mm,
it was a reward for me for being generous, I think, and for
mhm,
pausing
mm,
for enough time for that. Because I'm like, it turns out that wasn't really about me at all. Even though my system wanted to make it about me. And my
mm,
son apologized, I think, to the appropriate person,
mm,
right?
hmm.
It was just this beautiful
Yeah,
interaction
it
that
is
I
beautiful, and
witnessed.
it speaks to actually what you had was trust in yourself and trust in him ultimately.
Yeah.
And then sure enough, he rose to the occasion the
Yes.
next day with that kind of accountability. I mean, like, it's beautiful. So in all of that, what you're demonstrating is you probably did a lot of work to get to that moment, Beth,
That is
because
true.
of parent coaching and, your own process. He probably did a lot of work too,
He
and you
has.
all were in a different place, and you had built, I think, you deposited in that trust account, so to speak. And so you were able to check your reactivity, realize, hey, there's actually a lot here. I am going to be consistent with what matters to me. I'm going to give him the benefit out. And then sure enough, it ends up being a beautiful moment because of probably a lot of legwork that went into what preceded that moment in time.
Yeah. I know that's not how it turns out for everybody, but it was a marked moment for
Mm,
me, and just
yeah.
experiencing the wealth of generosity, what that
Mm,
can give to somebody, So
awesome. Well,
thanks
that's
for,
a great little story. Thank you for
yeah.
sharing. It was touching.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. That was just tremendous.
Mm.
So helpful in my opinion. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I look forward to kind of continuing the conversation kind of offline and hearing maybe what some of your listeners make of it. Because I think you'll probably include something in your show notes about this so people
Yes.
can learn more about it. And yeah, it's such an important topic. This day and age, maybe more than ever, is, we really do need to trust one another and know how to build trust, restore trust. So thank you for making this a priority in your podcast.
Yeah. Danny, will you just take a minute and tell people what you do right now that Open Skies is
Yeah.
closed?
Yeah, so as some of them know, I was a founding partner and helped run Open Sky Wilderness Therapy for 18 years, and we closed in 2024. I took a deep breath after a pause and realized that the work that people like you do, Beth, and others in this field doing in residential treatment, outpatient, wilderness, which is helping people heal and grow. And I wanted to remain a part of this work, but I'm not interested in having my phone beside me 24/7 anymore and having to respond to on call and crisis. But what I found is that for me to be at my best when I was in those positions at Open Sky is I had a coach. And so I want to be that to other leaders in this organization. I want to be that for their business. And so that's what inspired me to create Gain the Ridge Consulting, is to basically help leaders in the field, I think, find the joy and fulfillment they deserve because they're heroes doing incredibly hard work with so much at stake, with people's whose lives are in their hands. And that's hard, it's unrelenting, it's stressful. And so I want to be a resource to those people in their programs so they can thrive. And so ultimately their clients can thrive. So that's what I do now.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's great.
I just wanted to provide a space for you to say, because I think it's
Yeah,
amazing.
thank
So,
you. Awesome.
all right.
Well, I
Well, thank
appreciate
you
that,
so
Beth.
much. And thank you
Yeah.
everybody for listening. You guys take care. Bye.
Bye.